It's lovely here in Colorado, great weather, outdoor sports, and friendly people. But we have the highest elevation of any state, averaging 6,800 feet. And at 6,800 feet, we get only about 3/4 the oxygen at sea level, and it does make a difference. Air pressure and thus available oxygen drop about linearly with low altitude changes, losing about 3% per 1,000 feet. So at 5,000 feet, about Denver's elevation, we have about 86% of the sea level oxygen. At 14,000 feet, our highest mountains, we have only about 60%. To make up for it, your heart beats faster and you breathe more often. At 14,000 feet, your resting heart rate may be 40 to 50% higher, and your breathing rate more than twice as often. Most people are aware of acute altitude illness, which affects quite a few visitors and kills a few every year. But we aren't talking about those effects, but the more subtle effects of hypoxia or oxygen deprivation. Go higher than Colorado and the hypoxia damage is obvious. Climb Mount Everest where you only have 30% of sea level oxygen and you will probably have visible brain damage on an MRI when you get back. Indeed, a 2008 study found that of 13 climbers who climbed Everest, 11 had MRI evidence of brain atrophy. These studies also find some long-term brain damage at lower peaks. Climbing a 14er in Colorado is not good for your brain. Recreational climbers in particular are vulnerable. Skiing at 12,000 feet probably isn't good for the brain either, but gosh, no one here wants to hear that. How about our lovely Denver at only 5,280 feet? Our oxygen is about 86% of sea level, and blood oxygen is also lower. You may be 98% on the pulse oximeter at sea level, but you'll be only about 93% in Denver, even after acclimating. The lower oxygen does affect athletic performance. Short, high-speed sprints show little effect because you have less air resistance to plow through, but you do worse in endurance events. A study of over 100,000 performances found that some middle and long-distance events showed slight decrements even at 500 feet, with substantial impairments at 3,000 feet. So when your event depends on lots of oxygen, even 3,000 feet slows you down. Very high altitude promotes anorexia and weight loss in both rats and humans. We sometimes wonder if this accounts for the prevalence of rail-thin Coloradoans and those skinny yoga pants. And then there's suicide. All mountain states have high suicide rates. A 2011 study published in High Altitude Medicine and Biology showed a strong positive correlation between higher altitude and suicide. Higher altitude means more suicide, despite higher altitude also being associated with lower all-cause mortality. For example, there was a strong 0.5 correlation between altitude and the suicide rate, despite a negative 0.31 correlation between altitude and all-cause mortality. Here's the graph, where the baseline is set to under 1,000 feet, and as you go up, the suicide rate increases. By 5,000 feet, it's quite high. So even Denver's altitude increases suicide. High altitude hurts cognitive performance, with decrements in many cognitive tests at high altitude. The human brain weighs about 2% of a 150-pound person, but it uses 10% of the body's oxygen, both for firing neurons and the chemical housekeeping that helps keep the brain alive. If you are an elite brain athlete, like a top mathematician or scientist, it's possible that even the 86% oxygen at Denver's altitude could hurt your performance. Some knowledge workers, for that reason, here use oxygen concentrators when they really have to work and concentrate. This may be one of the reasons that while Denver has good universities, we don't have great ones. There is no world-class university in Denver or in Colorado. Thus, here are some of the oxygen risks of living in Colorado. There's acute altitude sickness, reduced oxygen leading to cardiac and pulmonary issues, anorexia with reduced appetite and weight loss, reduced athletic performance, a higher suicide risk, and possible cognitive impairments at high performance levels. Even if you adapt to the lower oxygen, your body and brain never get as much as at sea level. Most of us either don't care that much as we like the climate and lifestyle, or we supplement at times with an oxygen concentrator. But lower oxygen is something to consider if you are thinking of moving here.